Welcome once again to the SpartanMag.com VCast. My name is Jim Comparoni, publisher of SpartanMag.com, here once again with Paul Konyndyk. Paul Konyndyk is the associate editor of SpartanMag.com. We will be talking Michigan State football and a little bit of basketball. Also, Michigan State football, of course, coming off that unsightly 38-27 loss to Rutgers last weekend. And now Michigan State heading to Ann Arbor for a difficult challenge against the Wolverines. We'll be talking to Paul here shortly. Glad to have him with us. Glad to have you with us. Reminding you once again that SpartanMag.com VCast is brought to you by JFQ Lending. JFQ Lending is the title sponsor for the SpartanMag.com VCast. JFQ Lending is our favorite residential mortgage company, licensed in 40 states across the country. Call Josh Yoder. He's the representative at JFQ Lending. Call him at 480-378-0498. That's 480-378-0498. Go with Josh Yoder, and you're guaranteed the highest level of customer service. JFQ Lending has nearly 3,000 five-star online reviews. That's 3,000 five-star online reviews, including 1,800 five-star reviews with the Better Business Bureau. JFQ Lending carries an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. JFQ Lending is offering 30-year fixed rates below 3%. So set it and forget it, and you'll never need to refinance again. And as an exclusive offer to Spartan Maggers, JFQ Lending will cover any appraisal costs. Give them a call. I gave the number earlier. Go to SpartanMag.com, the Underground Bunker message board. Find the pinned post at the top of the Underground Bunker. You can get a hold of Josh. That way, we are glad to have him as part of the SpartanMag.com family. Glad to have Paul Konyndyk with us as well. Michigan State, tough game last weekend. Talking about last week. First of all, Paul, how you doing, man? You doing all right?
I'm doing good.
I know it's cold.
Yeah, I'm ready to jump right into it.
It's chilly in West Michigan. It's chilly in mid-Michigan, and it's getting toward Halloween. Michigan State's going to go to Ann Arbor trying to masquerade as a good football team. Maybe they'll be a little bit better by then, but it might not show up on the scoreboard. Michigan's going to want to put a five-finger death punch into Michigan State's heart this weekend. Coming off the weekend, the biggest disappointments, the offensive line, the run game. You and I were talking about Eli Collins before we went on the air here. Offensive line, Paul, I got to tell you, I'm expecting Nick Samak possibly to get the start at the center position ahead of Matt Allen. Matt Allen struggled. It's been a difficult haul for him. Good guy, but maybe it's a time for change there. Maybe he gets another shot. Maybe he looks a little bit better against a little bit more of a known commodity, albeit a talented commodity in the University of Michigan. But J.D. Duplain, I think he'll regain the starting job. Blake Buter started last week at left guard, struggled. Duplain came in, played better. I think there's a chance a new center and a new left guard for Michigan State for this game as they try to make the next game be the first game of the rest of their lives. Paul, your thoughts? Michigan State, problems going to Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, I just wrote this the other day, or, I expected, it kind of was a script flip. You throw the turnovers aside. We'll talk about that at some other point probably, but I thought Michigan State was going to have a little bit of trouble establishing the passing game with Rocky Lombardi. I thought you'd see him, maybe have some more some accuracy issues that he's had, during his career. Up until this point, but the passing game was the strength, for Michigan State's offense, and the run game was, that was a huge disappointment. And I think, that's something that hopefully is going to get better. I think Samak, I think basically a lot of times when you're talking about running the football, it's that interior. If you can't get a push and you don't have the strength and you don't have the guys that are physically capable of performing their tasks. They might know what they have to do. They might know everything. They might know everybody else's assignments, but unless you're a guy, especially the center position, that can physically get the job done, then that running game, if it gets caved in the middle, it really is hard to get things done. I kind of thought that Rutgers was going to be better. They had a chance to be better cohesively as a defense, because and then I referenced this after the game the other day, is like when Mark D'Antonio came in, he brought that defensive credibility. Everything got zapped in together at Michigan State, and guys maybe weren't exactly the personnel that he wanted, but they were playing football the right way. You saw that with Rutgers. You saw that front seven playing football the way that Rutgers has not played football cohesively. So in the first game of the season, it's going to be tough to run the football sometimes anyways, because guys are still are learning, getting adjusted and whatnot. You throw that in with some guys that have Big Ten bodies. This isn't Tulsa. This isn't a Western Michigan. where, you still might have some guys struggling to run the football in some ways. This is a Big Ten team that's got a good defensive coach. They had the front seven playing well and had them playing fundamentally sound. You factor that in with Michigan State's offensive line, especially the middle of that thing with Matt Allen and Blake Buter not being what they needed to be to get that push. You're going to have problems. You're going to have problems in the run game. So that's something that absolutely for Michigan State to make progress. I don't care what the record is this year, but for Michigan State to make progress, they have to take steps to being an offensive line that can consistently get a push, not get caved in by their opponents. And the offense is not going to get better as an entire offense until they can, at some point, run the ball, not necessarily on their own terms, but they have to have the credibility that they're going to be able to run the football. You have to have a credibility of run for the whole thing to work and to be a balanced offense. It's not going to happen otherwise.
I agree. And I agree that Michigan State's pass game in a lot of ways was better than I anticipated. I kind of thought Rocky Lombardi was going to struggle. We thought he would be the starter, but he was more accurate. He said he's been working on his accuracy. It showed. He wasn't perfect. He missed that one shot into the cover two hole that could have prolonged a drive that ended up in a punt. And then there was the one time when Rutgers had too many men on the field. He had Jaden Reed wide open, should have been a touchdown, missed him. It's hard to have a perfect game at the quarterback position, but I thought he was better. And for his sake, I'm hoping he can build on that. And I've got more of an open mind about what he can become as a quarterback. I think you can win with him. Need to be able to run the ball, need to be able to hang on to the ball, but I think he can manage a game and deliver some intermediate passes and the occasional, out route to the wide side of the field. Something I liked about him is the touch he had on those little short passes. You remember how I used to get driven nuts by Brian Lewerke throwing incompletions on little 5-yard passes, and it was always the fault of the guy dropping it. I'm like, at some point, man, you hear the term throw a catchable ball. Brian Lewerke, bless his heart, on some of those short ones, they still have to catch those balls, but he didn't help. He wasn't the most catchable deliverer of passes in those days, or facilitator of passes, but I think Lombardi's got a little bit of touch with that. We will see if he can follow up on that. He'll be going against a team that's a lot better on defense in a lot of ways. I wouldn't be surprised if we come out of this game thinking that Rutgers had a better defensive interior than Michigan, believe it or not. I wonder if Michael Dwumfor would be starting for Michigan if he were still there. That's part of it right there. Also, as far as the run game goes, I was just trying to look up how many yards Michigan State rushed for last weekend. What was it, like 60 yards rushing? For a prop bet, I was looking it up. I can't find it. For a prop bet, what are the chances Michigan State runs for more yards against Michigan than they did against Rutgers? Running for such a small figure against Rutgers, it wouldn't be really hard to do. You can still have a bad day of rushing the ball, rush for 85, and rush for better than you do the week before. That would be an interesting prop bet for Michigan State fans that are betting with Michigan fans this week. Because, Michigan fans are coming after Michigan State fans and saying, hey, we're going to bet this year on the game. Well, how many points do you want? What are you afraid with? The prop bet is, I'll bet we run the ball more against Michigan than we did against Rutgers. Some people might go for that. I'm not sure. They had better. It's hard to do a lot worse. Michigan's run defense, they gave up 130 against Minnesota. Minnesota ran the ball at times pretty well. Ibrahim's a good running back. Minnesota's tight ends are good. Michigan State's still trying to find themselves in terms of the tight end position. But Elijah Collins, sleepy performance last week. We talked about it. Looking at it again, maybe the most egregious error he made, was fourth quarter pass protection. When he just kind of short-armed that pass protection, looked like he didn't give full effort. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I hate to put words into those type of words describing what he was doing. Always seemed like a tough, good, team-oriented kid. Maybe he's doing all he can and it's just not working. I'm not sure. But we came into the season thinking, okay, running back in good hands. Elijah Collins, probably 1,000-yard rusher. That part's fine. Let's look at other parts of the team. Now, after one game, we're circling back and saying, run game, offensive line worse than expected. Connor Hayward starting and at running back for one game. And the run game is just completely different than what we expected 8 or 9 days ago. What do you think about Elijah Collins? What are we going to expect from him the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think one of the things, I'll reiterate what I said to you off air. I think, some of the things that have been said about the run game this year or this week that have been kind of frustrating to me is is people talking about, why didn't Elijah Collins get the ball more? Everybody knows that Connor Hayward is not a good running back. When I say this, I saw what Connor Hayward did out there, and he did more, in those circumstances, then it wasn't even close. He actually, got a couple first downs running. He had some tough runs, caught the ball out of the backfield. I don't know which game you guys out there were watching, but Elijah Collins did absolutely nothing. If you're going to make an argument out there and you're going to be disappointed, you're going to say, give the freshman the ball. I want to see what he could do more often, because he hit that hole hard, and he hit it with some ferocity. So I can understand people saying, hey, I want to see Jordan Simmons more often. And I think, when Mel Tucker talked this week, he mentioned Jordan Simmons and what he liked about what he did. I think you'll see Jordan Simmons more often in the games ahead. I mean, Mel Tucker did it on purpose. I mean, he liked what he saw. Everybody that watched it on TV saw some good things out of Jordan Simmons. But I don't know what to say to you if you think that Eli Collins deserved more carries than Connor Hayward. I don't care what kind of physical limitations you think that Connor Hayward had. He was more effective for his football team in the grand scheme of that game than Elijah Collins was. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that running back situation, but something's not right with Elijah Collins, and it's not a coaching thing, not putting him in the game. Those guys are going to put whoever they want, whoever they feel is going to give them the best job to win. They don't owe anybody anything. And to assume that Elijah Collins is automatically better because he was good in the past is a pretty big assumption. The film don't lie, and if you go back and you look at what both of those tailbacks did, there's nothing in Collins' performance that I saw that would give me as a coach evidence why he deserves more carries than he got. Jordan Simmons, different situation. You don't want to give that young man too many carries, I think, because he is a little bit undersized. And we've seen with guys, running backs that size, they tend to wear down a little bit. Northwestern's had a whole bunch of them. Sometimes those guys could be injury prone. But I like what Jordan Simmons did. I think that Connor Hayward did as best he could given his physical tools. He didn't do anything wrong out there. But to point the finger at a guy like Connor Hayward and say, well, I just don't like him because he's not what I think a running back should be, and blame that for the running game, that's just basically ignorant.
Right.
There's no other way to frame it.
And I don't think either of us, I don't think we're saying that Connor Hayward is the next Franco Harris or anything like that, to date myself. We just, based on what we saw that day, neither running back got a whole lot of room blocking at all. Obviously, Hayward may have gotten a little bit more on a couple of his carries, did some things in the pass game, but Collins didn't get any blocking on his 9 carries and netted about 3 yards, but seemed tentative. You watch it again, and maybe it was understandable because people were getting beat up front, but we will learn a little bit more about the running back situation in the pecking order. But here's the deal. It's like you said, our sources indicate that Elijah Collins did not have a good preseason camp and did not start because of that. It's not because the coaches weren't aware that Collins is better than Hayward. Collins was not better than Hayward in the month of September and early October leading up to the game. It's hard to imagine, but when you see in limited basis what we saw in the game that day, it kind of got a little bit of a hint of that. Then Jordan Simmons goes in, gives them a spark. They begin the second half with Brandon Wright starting at running back, which was interesting. And he lost 2 yards because Blake Buter got destroyed on that play. In other words, they're searching at running back. In other words, they know that Connor Hayward is not explosive. He's serviceable, and apparently the most trustworthy guy right now, gives him something in the pass game. Probably pretty good in pass protection most of the time. There was a sack on his watch early in the game, but it really wasn't his fault. We went over this last night. We went over this on the message board and over in the SpartanMag Live last night. I'm not going to get back into it, but he played inside out and had an inside threat, gave that his first indication, and then his first level of attention, and then tried to fan out to the outside. Quarterback's got to get the outside guy. Quarterback can't make 2 reads on a blitz situation right there when the outside linebacker's hot, coming in unblocked. Slid the protection the wrong way. Those are the type of things Mel Tucker was talking about, that communication needs to be better this week. Communication and sliding the protection correctly. Sometimes that's hard to do because the defensive front might give you more of a blitz look over here, so you slide that way, but they're actually going to drop on that direction and come from the other side. That's what Michigan will do. That's what good teams do. Sometimes you guess and slide the wrong way. But communication in the defensive backfield, communication in blocking, communication when you change to a play on 4th and 3, when you've got a pass play in, you change it to a run on your 3rd possession of the game. You change to a run because it's a run light defensive front. You go to a run, you change the play. Everybody's got the play except the tight end. Everybody in the offensive line goes inside zone to the right. Tight end goes inside zone to the left. Tight end made a block on the middle linebacker. He was wrong, but made a good block, but it messed up Jarvis on the right side. His guy came in and assisted on a tackle. Meanwhile, inside, that tilting defensive tackle just beat a guy inside. And you have two guys getting beat on 4th and 3 when you're running the ball on 4th and 3. That's a bad formula. And these coaches are still learning about the limitations of their guys. I thought one of the interesting things coming out of that game, and I talked about this earlier in the week, is from the press conference when Mel Tucker said that he was impressed with Rocky Lombardi's leadership, impressed with his toughness, impressed that Rocky Lombardi never got rattled. You know, numbers aside, Tucker sees a guy that they can latch the wagon to a little bit there, because there were a lot of bullets flying, a lot of nasty things going on. 14-0, throws an interception, sacked at the 1-yard line. And Rocky Lombardi, with that wrestler's mentality, was just like, you know, you say what you want about him as a quarterback, but he wasn't affected. And there's a lot to be said about that. Now this weekend, going against Michigan, rivalry game, his first start in a rivalry game against a very good defense. I kind of like the guy that won't get rattled. And Michigan's going to bring a lot of different pictures at him. And if he doesn't have a run game, it's going to be very difficult. There's a good chance Rocky Lombardi does not play well in this game. Statistically, we saw Brian Lewerke the last couple of years, especially 2 years ago. Even the game when Michigan State won 14-10, Lewerke was like, 9 out of 20 or something like that. It can be difficult to complete passes against Michigan, no secret there. But there'll be people, if Michigan State loses this game 30-7 and Lombardi is 8 out of 20, people are going to be like, get him out of there. Well, you could have the 1971 version of Joe Namath right now, and if the cards start falling negatively against you, it's hard for a quarterback to look good. I'm not sure Michigan's defense is all that. It's pretty good. Good with the pass rush and good with the pressures that they will bring at you when they get you on the ropes. That part of it's going to be difficult, no question about it. But Lombardi, pretty solid. What do you think about the communications and some of the other things that Mel Tucker said earlier in the week? What was your takeaway about Mel Tucker? He spent a lot of time not saying a whole lot, but your thoughts about earlier this week, what we've seen.
Well, just a couple things on Lombardi. There's a lot of people that talk about what he isn't, but what he did in that game in terms of not having melting down, I think was impressive. People say, yeah, it's Rutgers, not a big deal. But when your team has 7 turnovers, you think of like how 7 turnovers and then 2 turnovers on downs, inability to make fourth down plays. They were still able to get 29 points out of it without a run game. You see a lot of quarterbacks handle 1 or 2 bad things early, okay, and are able to bounce back from that. Like let's say they get a good series right before the half, and they get some momentum going in the half, and they come out and have some good things going for them in the second half, and they settle into that rhythm. But in this game, there's like bad things happening from start to finish, and you didn't see head hanging. You didn't see, him feeling sorry for himself. What I saw from him on the sideline is going around talking to people, being confident, being that leader that people expect your quarterback to be. And that says something. I think even if this is Brian Lewerke, who is a great guy, but I think back to some of the other quarterbacks, even like a Kirk Cousins, at some point, I know that Cousins, who is a pretty fiery guy at times, would have been really upset, from a game like this, and he maybe wouldn't have been as positive. Now, if this is happening in a game against Rutgers, and you're the quarterback, and you know that as the quarterback, you're going to be the guy that gets a lot of the criticism just by the nature of your position, the focus tends to turn inward. I never saw the inward focus on him feeling sorry for himself or anything like that. And I was impressed by that. As far as the communication, what Tucker was talking about, I think the one thing that I noticed in watching the game in real time and then going back and watching it, there's some opportunities for them to get off the field on third down with some good communication, or on offense, there's maybe some opportunities for them to change into better plays earlier than they did, or get guys moved around. That's where communication is important to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But the third down defense, I think that's where, your communication becomes exceedingly important. I also think that when you look at the fact that Michigan State didn't have spring football, so they're not repping this stuff. This is like the first time that they've done this against someone else besides themselves, running this defense. And when you don't have all those thousands of reps, and this is a new thing, there's going to be issues with communication. But
right there, because we've been defending two of the most unpopular people in terms of message board criticism. Lombardi, we're pro Lombardi, pro Hayward, and talking now in terms of spring football. I can hear people right now saying, yeah, well, Rutgers didn't have spring football either. But Michigan State treated it differently in terms of the previous weeks heading in. But
can I mention a couple of things on Rutgers didn't have spring football, but they brought a bunch of transfers in. Some of those transfers came from Ohio State or had played, had familiarity with Schiano. I think back to Michigan State when Mark D'Antonio took over, and the defensive lineman they brought in 2008 from Cincinnati, Trevor Anderson. I remember writing a whole bunch of stories about Trevor Anderson, and he came over even in 2007, when he came over and had to sit out, he was sitting there working with the Michigan State defensive linemen that had not been part of the system. He was schooling them from a player level of what you need to do technique-wise and these type of things. So if you have a couple transfers come in, and you're Greg Schiano, and you have transfers come in that are familiar with what you do as a defensive coordinator, or you come in early enough where you're working or you have face-to-face communication with people, you have more workouts in the wintertime, that type of thing, or just the whole thing you're ahead. But I go back to what Michigan State did when Trevor Anderson came in, and Rutgers has had a lot of transfers in there, and I think that helps because they have a few guys that have played in that system, whether that's like a Malik Barrow type guy, who's familiar kind of with what some of the things that Schiano did, or the defensive back that came in from Ohio State. Did he play? He played under Schiano, right, at Ohio State?
Yeah, he was MVP of the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, so those are guys that know what Schiano wants to do on defense. So if you had a guy like Antoine Simmons who had transferred in to play for Mel Tucker after having already played for Mel Tucker, or a guy like Xavier Henderson, or you just go on down the list and look at some of the veteran players, those guys can put it into a player perspective even when you're not practicing. They can help you understand what you need to do in terms of leverages, hand placement, all the kind of things that maybe players don't ask coaches always, but they can go to their teammate and feel comfortable because it's not a stupid question. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, and Mike Tressel said last week, and he's always said this, that they want to be the smartest defense in the country and have players know what to do so they can play fast. And they might have had that at a few positions, but I look at Noah Harvey, and I've mentioned this earlier this week, good kid, trying hard, a proven player last week, but on two of Rutgers' early touchdowns inside the 10-yard line, I mean, he just flat out went the wrong direction and bumped into people heading in the wrong direction. He's got people two-gapping in front of him, so it's a little bit more of a read and react situation at the linebacker position. It's not like you're freelancing, but you have to have a knack on which way things are going because you could play different gaps, whereas the old system, it's normally one gapping, and you've got the C gap or the B gap, and you're shooting it. You're reading your backfield flow, and whether it's a pressure or whatever, you've got that gap, and you're running with it, and it's fewer reads, just downhill. And he did not look like himself. And then in the fourth quarter, Michigan State started playing more one gap, and he started coming downhill and hitting people. He looked like a different player because he could just pull the pin and be what he is. So that's a guy that really didn't know what to do, still learning, spring practice style. Ron Armstrong and I talked about this a couple of days ago. Michigan State had 2 scrimmages, then they played a game. That's the same as in spring practice, having 2 scrimmages, then you play a spring green-white game. In some ways, some of these guys were in green-white game mode. Rutgers was not, to their credit. Somehow they got their stuff in and communicated well. That being said, Michigan State still threw for 300 yards and only punted twice. So it's not like Rutgers defense was really stuffing Michigan State all day. They were forcing turnovers and doing a good job doing that. Sometimes they were unforced turnovers, but what Rutgers did was they didn't make mistakes, obviously. Michigan State making mistakes all over the place. Makes me wonder, just from a theoretical standpoint, back in August, the Big Ten said, we are postponing the season till the spring, and that's final. And Mel Tucker said, okay, we're playing in the spring. Let's adjust our calendar. Starting now, it's January. We're going into January, February, and half of March, winter conditioning right now. The Big Ten allowed teams to get on the field 12 hours a week with spider pads. Michigan State didn't do that. He felt like in the 4 days of camp, people came back with a good understanding of the principles based on Zoom team meetings. Thought that was enough, thought it was more important to get in a winter conditioning because he thought they needed that. If he had it to do all over again, if he would have known, in August, you're going to be playing October 24th, would they have been on the field with those spider pads and repping more of these things? Sure, they had 6 weeks to get ready. They had 2 scrimmages. I heard the defense didn't look good in the scrimmages, looked maybe a little bit better in this game. I'm not sure what the answers are. I'm not sure if Mel Tucker would ever level with us on all those things, but these are the questions that pop up when you see some players that are better than what they've shown, like Noah Harvey, and then you see even offensive linemen. I think Matt Allen's better than that. I've never seen him physically just have trouble on an inside slanting guy all day. I don't know what was going on there, but Tucker's saying all the cliches like they're hoping to make their best improvement between week 1 and week 2, and they're going to need it this weekend. I'm sure you watched at least some of the Michigan State-Minnesota game. I'm sorry, Michigan-Minnesota. Michigan defeated the Gophers 49-24. Surprisingly easy fashion up in Minneapolis. So coming into this game, I'm not feeling as much anxiety from Michigan State fans. It feels like they already know that Michigan State's going to lose, so they're not as on edge this week. When the game starts, they will be. But your thoughts about Michigan and the challenge that Michigan State has this weekend?
Well, first off, I thought Minnesota was going to be better than they were because they returned their quarterback and they returned some of their offensive line. We don't know, I think accurately how much some of the issues that they had health-wise, Minnesota played into everything that's been going on in that game. So there was that issue because they lost a lot of personnel, and the Big Ten's rules, their COVID rules and that type of thing. The 21 days that if a player's out, it's going to put a lot of pressure on anyone. So Minnesota, I expected to be better. I expected them to be better than they were, simply because they had some veteran offensive linemen coming back, and they had a quarterback who's been experienced. Michigan, I think that they play really well in the beginning of the season. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, and they do a nice job. They do a nice job with physicality, with pressure, with being physical at defensive back. And I just think that when you look at the way Michigan plays, in the way Michigan State isn't playing right now, in terms of the weaknesses that Michigan State has, to win a one-dimensional football game against a team like Michigan is awfully difficult. And we've seen, we saw it in 2017 with Brian Lewerke. So what was he able to do when he won a one-dimensional football game? He was able to scramble and get the running yards that his tailbacks couldn't get behind a patchwork offensive line. So that's one thing. So if Rocky Lombardi is going to make this game competitive, or if the offense is going to make this game competitive, he's got to scramble. He's got to show pocket awareness and scramble for tough running yards. The other thing is he's got to have complete faith, like Brian Lewerke did in 2017, that when he throws the ball up in the air, that his guys are going to make catches on 50-50 balls. Now, we saw some good athletes past weekend with Jaden Reed and Jalen Naylor, but those guys aren't big physical receivers per se. We already saw that, like, the fumble issues with those guys. But can Rocky Lombardi have that wrestler's mentality and say, hey, man, I'm or be like a Spartan warrior, man, I know I'm dying out here. I know I'm one of the 300 that's going to die, but I'm going to die with valor. He's got to put that ball up there, have confidence that his guys can make plays and live with the results. But if you're not able to run the football, and you're not able to pick up the other thing that bothers me about this game from a Michigan State perspective is if your tailbacks and your tight ends can't block against a team that's going to be sending it from all different directions. This thing could snowball. So what I wrote for in like a couple previews, did a Q&A with the Michigan side, is I can see Michigan State being in a situation where they're competitive for a while, or they do some good things on offense, moving the ball at times, but not finishing drives. We've seen that when the offensive line struggles. I can see the defense giving as much as they can and playing on emotion and making some big plays. Guys like Antoine Simmons, guys like Xavier Henderson. I can see some of those defensive linemen doing some things and staying strong for a long time. But it does not take a long time for things to snowball. And one of the things we've seen from Michigan, since Don Brown has been there, or through a lot of the Harbaugh era, they might look really not great for 3 quarters, but eventually some of that physicality, something breaks and then it spirals, and then they kind of step on the throat, or another team implodes. And I hate to say that, but I feel like that's what's going to happen with Michigan State this weekend, provided they avoid the turnovers. If they avoid the turnovers, it's over from the coin toss. If they turn the ball over, it's over from the coin toss. But if they stay strong, play as well as they can play, this game might be close for a while, but I do feel like it's eventually going to snowball, because without a run game, you can't keep your defense on the sideline staying well rested, and eventually you're going to wear down, and it's going to go from manageable within striking distance to 3 touchdowns or 4 touchdowns. And that's just what happens in the game of football.
Yeah, if Michigan State is still in it going into the second half, that'll be a victory in itself. I know they're not playing for moral victories, but that would suggest that they held up defensively a little bit, maybe sustained some drives, maybe got some better running back blocking and tight end blocking. Like you said, very important in the blitz pickup game, and running back pass protection and tight end blocking was not great. Tight end blocking was a little bit better in the run game than it was last year. It's not saying much for Dotson and Gillison, but they were improved in run blocking. That being said, Dotson missed a big block on a 3rd and 1 play early in the game on a wham block, just missed the guy. Next play was the 4th and 3 when he made the mistake when they were stopped, 3rd possession of the game. Now, Michigan, the other thing that Michigan is dangerous with is the physicality in their run game. They've got a lot of good talent, the running back position, and what they do with Ben Mason as a blocking back is unique and effective. And they rally around it, and they do it with enthusiasm. Mason is a hammer, and you don't see blocking backs in today's football very often. And, it's not, it's gotten to the point where Antoine Simmons is still new at inside linebacker, and Noah Harvey's been starting for 5 games, who's added some weight and become an inside linebacker. But those guys are not natural middle linebackers like Max Bulla or Riley Bulla or some of those guys we've seen back there. They're going to be hit with Ben Mason playing, 1979 style isolation blocks on the middle linebackers. And that can become new and tiring to guys, even guys with as much heart as Antoine Simmons. That's going to be difficult. Michigan State's been a good run defense over the years. We will see if they remain a good run defense this weekend with a new defensive scheme against a team that was surprisingly good on the offensive line. University of Michigan last weekend, varied in their approach, pulling blockers, pulling extra backside blockers, getting extra people at the point of attack to go along with that blocking back, and explosive running backs behind it. And a running back that they'll saddle up and play, and they'll give them an assortment of designed keepers, which are difficult to stop because if the quarterback is going behind a lead blocker, they're in a +1 situation. It's the Wildcat theory that Michigan State's never been able to harness, but the running back designed keeps, it's hard to keep those from gaining 6-7 yards. A big guy like that falling forward. Next thing you know, they've strung 2-3 first downs together, and they're at your 21-yard line. That's what they kept doing against Minnesota. That can happen again. Michigan State's defense, I would imagine, can be better than Minnesota's, but the communication part of it needs to be on point. Noah Harvey needs to know what he's doing. And the way Michigan will change formations and motion people and snap it in an instant, they can get you off kilter in your communications. And you've got Michigan State players that are still getting comfortable with all of the facets within the new defense. So there's potential there for this thing to get unsavory and unsightly. And if it gets that way, Harbaugh's going to want to score 70 points like he did against Rutgers a couple of times. Quite frankly, last year, Michigan State lost whatever it was, 41-13 or 14. But with 10 minutes to go in that game, D'Antonio was trying to melt clock. He was trying to get out of there without Michigan scoring 60. That's what Harbaugh's going to want to do for various reasons. And Michigan State had better avoid mistakes if they want to keep this like a respectable, like 31-21 type of loss. Now, that's where Michigan State is right now. Michigan, the thing with Michigan is I'm sensing there's good leadership on that team. There's less of a diva factor that has hamstrung their program over the years. Many times the best Michigan teams are the teams that come in underrated. It's rare that a Michigan team is underrated, but going back to Schembechler, Moeller, and Lloyd Carr, some of their best teams were the ones that were underrated. I think being underrated mixes better in that town, because if they're overrated, that town will cripple them because they'll tell them how great they are and give them advance credit, and they wind up back in the pumpkin patch with Linus. But that's not the case this year, and they played good football this weekend, and they're going to hope they don't get too many pats on the back prior to this game. Their run defense, Minnesota rushed for 130. A good team, I think, can put a hole in Michigan's defense. I'm just not sure when they're going to see a good team anytime soon, specifically this weekend.
Yeah, and just one thing about Minnesota and the way they run the football, and PJ Fleck going back to Western Michigan, they might always put up huge numbers, but they've always had a solid run game operation because they put such a good emphasis on it. So if you're looking at Minnesota and saying, hey, they're not that great at running the football, I would say that's kind of a mistake because they're always pretty consistent, and they're a consistently good run game operation. This isn't always just about stats that they put up. Even back when he was at Western Michigan, and they were going up against Michigan State's really good run defenses, and they'd be held maybe under 120, under 100 yards, and you look back and you look at some of the tailbacks they had, you're like, hey, you know what? Michigan State did a really good job against the run because that was a good run game operation. So don't think because Minnesota only rushed for 130 that Michigan State's going to rush for 130, because Minnesota's run game operation is well ahead of where Michigan State's is right now.
It was a good 130. For Michigan people, they're disappointed in the run defense. That was one of the negatives of that game. I'm saying Minnesota rushed 130 like that was a plus for them. And it could have been more if they weren't behind by 3 touchdowns. They'd go to the air so much. But like the first drive of the second half, they ran the ball 2 or 3 times, chunk yardage. Aiden Hutchinson's getting a lot of hype. He's a good player, good pass rusher, good motor, tries hard. But when Minnesota leaned on him with a double team, they moved him, and he was displaced by tight end blocks a couple of times on that drive in run defense. But Michigan State does not have tight end blocking like Minnesota does right now. Now, anything else on football before we shift gears and talk about what Izzo talked about a little bit today?
No, let's shift gears to basketball for a
Izzo
minute.
today talking about they've had 2 weeks of practice. They think they're going to have their schedule together here pretty soon. Talking about playing bus games against Eastern, Western, Central, Oakland University. That sounds good to me. Maybe Notre Dame. The Duke game is not going to be in Orlando, but they're talking about playing it somewhere. I don't know what that means. Probably Virginia and the ACC Challenge if they have that. That's what it sounded like. But he gave some updates on players. Joshua Langford, he says, has had a good couple of weeks, and to the point where they're talking about wanting, just being careful and understanding that consistency is going to be something they'll have to work through with him because he hasn't played in 2 weeks. Joey Hauser, they're really excited. They continue to be excited to see what they see from him coming out of his shell a little bit with his teammates. Always been a good shooter. Izzo says he's the best playmaking big guy he's possibly had, along with next to a guy like Draymond Green. That's high praise. Said Aaron Henry and Hauser have been playing really well lately. Gabe Brown had a good offseason. Talked about Gabe Brown possibly coming off the bench as an instant offense scorer like Morris Peterson. Wants to talk to him about that. That would, when he said Gabe Brown coming off the bench, does that mean Joshua Langford starting as a veteran? Or does that mean Lawyer starting at the point and Rocket Watts at the wing? Paul, your thoughts about what Izzo said today? It all sounds pretty positive. He's pretty upbeat, and he's just hoping that things come together for the season.
Well, first off, just like some housekeeping things for basketball. So Michigan State's looking at a 31-game schedule, 27-game schedule instead of a 31 that they would have had last year. So they're looking at 20 conference games and 7 non-conference games, potentially 5 non-conference games if the Big Ten were to go to a 22-game schedule. So that's one of the things to think about. So he thinks Duke is locked in, like you said. The Virginia game, I don't think he would say that publicly unless he knew that was locked in. He called those 2 games anchor games in terms of Michigan State's traditional non-conference schedule. And then you're looking at a Notre Dame game. I thought it was interesting that they talked about going within 2 hours driving and going by buses. He also mentioned financially that would be feasible. That would be good. I think it's interesting that schools like Michigan State that have traveled wherever, whenever, however in the past are talking about financial responsibility. That's just kind of the year that we're in because of all the financial losses that everyone has incurred. At the same time, it's easier to keep guys safe, I think, in a bus type scenario or whatever. I don't know, but that's what they want to do. But the non-conference schedule, that's pretty intriguing. As far as player development wise goes, and how the manifestations of how that lineup might come apart. Gabe Brown to me is, and I felt like this last year, I felt like Gabe Brown will probably be ahead of where Josh Langford was anyways, because he had a really good offseason. I think he's taken more and more steps. I don't think you're going to hear Tom Izzo say anything that would say that Josh Langford's not a starter right now, because that's something you don't want to put that out there. You don't want that to be the focus of all the media attention. There's no doubt in my mind that Josh Langford is pleasing Tom Izzo with how he's come along. But at some point, it might be pretty difficult for Michigan State not to start Gabe Brown. I could see Josh Langford coming off the bench in the role of a sixth guy, because he's shooting the ball well by all accounts. And you look at a guy like Kyle Arns, what he meant to Michigan State's team coming off the bench. I think the big thing with Lawyer as a potential starting point guard, it's not what's going on in practice now. It's how will they be feeling after a non-conference schedule of playing a Duke, playing a Virginia, possibly playing a Notre Dame. How is Lawyer going to look at point guard from that aspect? What do the point guard situation look like in the Big Ten? Those are all going to be determining factors on who plays the point guard position. At some point, defense of the point guard is going to be a big deal.
And he said, he said Lawyer's stronger, playing better defense. We've heard Izzo say things in the past, and sometimes he's just saying things so the players can hear it and the public can hear it. But when he says Lawyer's playing well, when I say starting the Lawyer at point guard, I don't mean him playing 32 minutes at the point guard. It could just be a rotational thing at the outset. But when he says Lawyer's playing well, what do you take? And they're working with Watts at other positions. Everybody assumes Watts is the point guard. If he plays at other positions, he can play some minutes at the two, and Lawyer can maybe get more than the customary 8 minutes a game that a backup point guard gets. I'm not saying he's at that level where he deserves it. We've not seen him play. We're just going off of what Izzo's been telling us. But based on what Izzo's been telling us, does that change your mindset on Lawyer and how many minutes he could possibly play? Could he be an 18-minute guy rather than an 8-minute guy?
Yeah, I think he could be I think he could be an 18-minute guy, a 20-minute guy, but some of it is going to be dependent on the matchups. If you have a jet quick point guard, or you have a really big point guard like Penn State had last year, or or a guy like or some of the bigger point guards that can drive, can play like a Malcolm Brown at Illinois, guys that can get to the line. If you got a 6.5 point guard, then you can't probably afford to play Lawyer too many minutes. I think the other consideration is, and we don't always think about this, is how is Watts adjusting to playing point guard? That's like, if he's really comfortable as shooting guard, he knows where he's supposed to run. He knows how to run the lanes. If you're playing him a lot of point guard minutes and he has to think about it, are you maximizing what you could possibly get out of Watts? You've got to be able to, if you're playing two positions, you got to be able to compartmentalize, go back and forth. They want to get maximum production out of Watts. And if he's playing point guard, is it harder for him to do his thing as a scorer? I don't know. I do think that there's a lot of guys, and there's a lot of, the one thing that really, whenever Tom Izzo talks about this team, there's a lot of different pieces that can fit in a lot of different ways. And I think Tom Izzo likes some of this team simply because of that, because it does seem like an NBA team, to the aspect if you got a bunch of guys that could come off the bench and contribute in varying roles. The other interesting thing he talked about today is switching more because of having guys like Julius Marble, Malik Hall, and Joey Hauser. And so I thought that was interesting. But he's looking at this as like one of those like Golden State Warrior teams, one of the good ones where they could have different mix and match pieces. He's looking at different scenarios. And I think that's how you almost have to look at this team when you don't have like a defensive stopper like a Xavier Tillman. You're gonna have to do a committee approach, and you're gonna have to do it piecemeal based on who you're playing in matchups.
And talking about switching more, says Julius Marble is a strong, solid, tough-minded guy. He's excited about what he brings to the table. That's music to the ears of Michigan State basketball fans, because they could use some of that. When he talks about switching more, I mean, Michigan State switched about as much 5-on-1 with Xavier Tillman than they have since Andre Hudson. So switching more, they did it a lot last year.
Switching more than he anticipated he could now that Tillman's not there. I think that's what he meant.
That makes more sense. All right, and they're talking about Eastern, Western, Central, and Oakland and Notre Dame to fill out that schedule. I wonder if they stay along those lines, rather than flying in a nickel state, do you bus in, Wright State, Toledo, Bowling Green, some of these other bus games. Valpo, we've never seen them play Valpo. Sometimes that can be a little bit of a dangerous game, but that's not very far away. There's teams in Chicago. I don't know. The schedule could look different. Could be better in some ways, because some of those teams that I just mentioned are good mid-major programs. That's different than playing some of the low majors that you usually play for guarantees. He said they've talked about with their marketing people about how they can make their arena look different ways like the NBA did. So I think you're going to see a wall of fans on television, possibly for Michigan State home games. If you get to the point where there are home games, there's no schedule right now. Expecting to be one next week. I think the Big 12 announced their schedule last week for basketball. So it's good to hear some basketball stuff. We're getting into close to November. Should be talking basketball. Izzo's upbeat. Gabe Brown, he said he had a really good offseason, has been shooting really well. We've seen him make progressions. Joey Hauser's going to be fascinating to watch. Izzo really had a lot of great things to say about him. But he said Hauser and Aaron Henry are the two guys that have played the best. I think he said that in the last couple of weeks. So that's good news with Aaron Henry. Your last thoughts on basketball before we sign off, and your reactions to other things that Izzo said.
Yeah, I think the other thing you mentioned is that Malik Hall is coming on strong now because he was slowed down some by tendonitis. So that's something that, we didn't hear Malik Hall a lot when this practice thing started, but that's something to watch. The thing that intrigued me about Hauser is, not only him coming out of his shell, caring about his teammates, but Izzo was talking about how he's improved defensively. That was always, I think, a weak spot with Joey Hauser. So if if both Joey Hauser and Gabe Brown, because we keep hearing good things about Gabe Brown learning how to use his athleticism and his length on defense. If those two guys are improved defensively, that's going to really, really help Michigan State out. And, if Josh Langford keeps on making progress, through that process of coming back, he's also got length on defense. Aaron Henry can be a great defender. Rocket Watts can be a great defender as well. It's going to be interesting to see what this team looks like when they get out on the court, because I think, they could do some things. The other thing, just before we go, is Mady Sissoko. Izzo mentioned that, what we kind of all know is that the guy's got tremendous upside, tremendously skilled, tremendously blessed with physical body talent, jump out of the gym, wants to, can go a million miles an hour. He had jokingly called him Al Anaganye, needs to stop fouling. But usually when Izzo starts joking about a guy needing to stop fouling, the guy ends up being a really good defensive player, and Izzo really likes him. I mean, the same type of thing he was saying about Mady was what he was saying about Tillman. Now, Mady's more of a shot blocker than Tillman ever was, but that was like kind of the first impression we had him saying anything on Mady. He said he likes what he's seen from Kithier, the last couple of days, and he also mentioned that. When he was asked about a starting lineup, he started giving your 2 or 3 guys, and then he started going through the entire roster. So they don't know what they're going to do starting wise. And I just started right before we got on this, was writing a notebook, and I started trying to piece that together. And I'm like, hey, you know what? He likes his guys. He doesn't know how they're going to all fit, but he feels like he's got plenty of time under these circumstances, because there is no schedule, to get his guys in the best position that he can get them before the start of the season.
A month to go before they're allowed to start playing games, if the games come together. No exhibition games, so that'll be different, but a month away from basketball starting late. But it's good to hear some basketball talk. Michigan State going to Michigan to play some football this weekend. I'm sure, one thing that Michigan State would like to do is put some pressure on Milton, the quarterback. Milton was pretty good against Minnesota. They made the game, Michigan's coaches made the game easy for him, and he did a good job. But Michigan State's going to try to show him different pictures and coax him into a mistake. If you show him different pictures, which is what Hazelton did real well at Kansas State, they did it real well while remaining on the same page. Are they at the stage where they can show Milton different pictures and remain on the same page, showing that they're coming with 8 but only come with 4, and get back into a cover 3? And then the next time, show they're coming with 8, come with 5, and get back into a 4 deep or a man free seamlessly like they did at Kansas State. Are they there yet? We didn't see a lot of evidence of it in the last game, although the defensive backfield played pretty well. The linebacker level has to play better. Noah Harvey has to know what to do. Even if you do have a good scheme on, if you're Hazelton, and you do change pictures and you come with 5 from this direction, or a 5-man blitz where you've done a good job of tricking them on where the pressure is coming from, and it's just a light pressure, like a 5-man pressure. Even then, does Michigan State have the talent to get home? You can have a good pressure on, but if you don't have Shalik Calhoun and Marcus Rush out there, it might not amount to much. Drew Beasley did some good things. Panishuk was not able to get off his blocks. It looked like he was giving good effort, but didn't quite get much done. Meanwhile, Michigan's offensive lineman pass protection was excellent against Minnesota last weekend. Those things meshing together does not seem to bode well for Michigan State, but if they get the most improvement between week 1 and week 2, and if Michigan's intensity, if they get a little fat and full of themselves, maybe Michigan State is a couple of breaks away from taking this game into the third quarter and longer. We will see. Michigan's got 60 minutes to prove they're the better team. Michigan's going to show up. Michigan State's going to show up and play hard. It'll be interesting and intriguing for a while, maybe even entertaining. We'll have to wait and see. Game coming up in Ann Arbor this weekend. Paul Konyndyk, any closing thoughts?
Nope, no closing thoughts today.
All right, for Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. You've been watching the VCast from East Lansing, Michigan, and Lowell, Michigan, SpartanMag.com.